Welcome back to episode 6 of Films on L.H.D. Today's a special day because we've got our first few guests.
Yep. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth and Matthew Oram. Dubbing stars from back in the day, known for a lot of films that are kind of underground cult kung fu classics and stuff. So, yeah, looking forward to having this conversation with you guys. As we had this planned for a year, now we can finally do it. I mean, let's just start off with the history of it and how it all got started.
Well, we could first of all, I'll return to your introduction of us as dubbing stars. When we were doing the dubbing, and we had our dubbing company, it was very, very much a business activity. It's something we did. We knew just how much money we would earn, and I think it would be in the old days about journalism. They used to refer to hack writers, as it used to refer to journalism as Grub Street.
Okay.
And we were the kind of Grub Street of the film business. I mean, we're very much, although we did have a definite function, we were very much the tail end. So we were employed by Far Eastern entrepreneurs, invariably Chinese, to put a lingua franca on a soundtrack of the Chinese movies, which could then be sold worldwide. Now, they might have been just aiming at the market of French West Africa, but they weren't. They were aiming at the world. So it was English, but English not necessarily for English-speaking countries, but because it was much easier for, say, Portuguese in Brazil to be redubbing, if they wanted to, a Portuguese version of the English rather than the Chinese. And why it worked in many ways for us was because Chinese, written Chinese, the characters, which is completely gobbledygook to everybody else, represents a syllable. Each character represents a syllable. So in a Chinese script, when you look down the characters, each character is a lip movement. So when it comes to putting words into mouths, that was one advantage. The other thing that we needed to have was we needed a Chinese to work with us closely.
Like a translator.
But what he had, what we were given, they would phone up my wife, and Elizabeth was very much the producer and the coordinator, and later also took on starring roles, and was also the one who helped me prepare the script. She would type it out, and she was a very, very, very fast typist. She would be phoned up by one of these producers who'd got hold of a Chinese movie. Now, Chinese movies, we should remind ourselves, made in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s in the Far East, they used to make them in 4 to 5 days. Now, that's a feature-length film, 9 reels. They were very, very formulaic. And later they found that they could actually get even more money out of these movies by selling the rights worldwide. So these guys would turn up, and they'd turn, usually independent film producers, they'd say, how much for the worldwide rights? And the guy go, give me 10,000, okay, 10,000 US dollars. I mean, it could be as cheap as that, it might be 15,000, but it wasn't big money. Then he would phone Elizabeth and I up. We would go and see the movie. We would see it would be in Chinese. He would give us a script, a so-called script, which generally reflected the subtitles, because there would be a Chinese subtitle, and that script would have the Chinese subtitles, which kind of refer to the dialogue, and a rough English translation of it underneath.
Right. I've seen that.
So, but for instance, you could have, let's say, 20 Chinese characters. There would be one sentence in English underneath saying, what do you think you are doing here? But then my Chinese colleague would listen to the actual soundtrack, and his job was to count the syllables and the pauses.
Okay.
So, and it was fairly easy for him because, as I said, one Chinese character is one syllable, one lip movement. So I would get a sheet of paper which said at the top, what do you think you're doing here? Maybe with the character, Mr. Chan. And then there would be 10 pause, 5 pause, 6 pause, 8 pause, 8 pause, 6 pause, 3 pause, 2 pause, 10 pause, 5 pause. And this could go on. I could have 20 lines of these 10 pause, 12 pause, and the only clue I had as to what the content was, I'd seen the movie, and the fact that I had this line in English saying, what do you think you're doing here? And I then had to make that make sense, extend the meaning, and it had to coincide the exact syllabic count for what my colleague Eddie Chan had put underneath. So that in itself was quite a job.
Complicated.
That was quite a job. That was quite a job.
It's almost like he wrote the script.
Yeah, that was quite a job. And so we would see the movie, they'd give us the script, and then he didn't like to discuss, the Chinese producer who owned the film rights worldwide, didn't like to discuss with me too much. He talked directly with Elizabeth. And maybe you talk about the discussions you used to have.
Well, before you do, but so nobody taught you how to do that? That was just trial and error, and you got better and better at it?
Yes. In fact, I got so good at it that this little finger here had a callus developed on
This
it.
method doesn't tell you.
Because I would be writing like that so fast. Our record, I like talking about this, our record was we dubbed 8 films, 8 feature-length films in 9 days. Bear in mind, we all had daytime jobs. So we wouldn't start dubbing until 5 or 6 in the evening. And then we'd finish around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And generally speaking, on the standard Common Garden Kung Fu movie, we could dub a whole feature film in one evening session.
Wow.
And how we did that, you had to be good. You had to be really, really sharp. We were at a very high alert level, like constantly in the starting gun, because as soon as you saw that flap move, that lip move, you had to hit it. You had to hit it. And in front of us, there was a little desk, tilted desk, where we would put the script. And let's say a reel would be cut into 10 loops, say 100 foot a loop. And generally speaking, that would coincide with a scene. So maybe it was 120 foot, or maybe it was bigger, so it was cut into 2 loops. You wouldn't want the loop to be too long. We also had the convenience that we could, and usually this was done prior to our seeing the film, was the blokes who would edit and put this together and the soundtrack and everything will have already cut the film up into what we called loops. So there'd be a bit of blank tape every 100 foot or so. So we could see where it is. And sometimes while we were looking at it, my wife and I would decide to slightly rearrange a loop, and we would discuss it with them. But by and large, because they knew how it worked. And we had what we called NDs. We loved NDs. NDs is no dubbing.
Okay.
And NDs were all the action, all the long shots, and fighting scenes.
Yeah.
Because fighting, whether it's a Chinese fighting or it's English fighting, they all sound the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how that worked. And as I said, it was very, very formulaic. So usually in the first reel, you had to establish the hero and the villain, and the hero had to be motivated, invariably revenge, because
Usually.
his mother had been murdered, his sister had been murdered and raped, terrible, terrible stuff. And then he had to go off and perfect his skills as a fighter, and then he had to find the villain.
Yeah.
So he would have to go to various casinos and brothels and
Yeah.
what have you, and there would be fights along the way. And then the last two reels 8 and 9, were invariably fighting. I mean, the entire, it would
Yeah.
be fighting.
Like the final boss fight. Yeah.
Yes.
One of the
You
reasons,
basically
yes,
just-
yeah, one of the reasons why we can finish a whole feature in one night, because maybe half
because-
of it is all fight scenes, or
Yeah.
so we're always very happy when there's fights. We say, "Oh,
You basically described like 90% of Kung Fu cinema from that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the
Yeah.
same story. Yeah.
And actually, my wife and I, we amuse each other, because sometimes when we see some Hollywood formula movies,
Yeah.
they actually pretty well conform
exactly
to the same kind
Yeah.
of thing.
It's
you
just
know.
the technology. Is
The,
so much.
the hero gets set up in the first 10, 15 minutes
Yeah.
with the villain, and off you go.
Yeah.
What Matthew hasn't mentioned is that all this was taking place in the 70s and 80s. You talk about it. And in those days, it was still the movies were in a reel, those big reels. So that's why they could cut it up into 100,
The loops.
100 feet loops. And then so every time when we watch something, we'd say, oh, that loop, no dubbing, so that's marked 1-1 or 1-2. And then we put all together all the fight loops and the music, no dialogue in another section. So we only take out all the dialogue sections. And then because we're a very small crew, everybody acted with two different voices for different characters. Like Matthew would be the hero,
Yeah.
and he'll play the sidekick and the old man, something like
Yeah.
that. And we usually will have 4 or 5 maximum dubbers for the whole movie.
Would you discuss that? Would you discuss characters, or you just trust them?
Oh, no, we
I
we
kind of
cast,
knew the
yeah.
voices. I
Yeah.
kind of knew the voices.
Yeah.
So I would cast it. And I would prefer not to have to talk to myself. For instance, if I was,
Right.
say, I was the hero and I was one of the bad guys and we were appearing in the same loop the whole time, that
It's very
didn't
difficult.
really work.
Yeah.
But, so, generally speaking, I'd be an old man. That was my standby. Hey, that kind of voice. Hey. So I'd be an old man. But the problem with the hero is the hero was invariably a real virile 25-year-old. And during the time of our dubbing, my voice aged. It became more middle-aged.
Yeah, so you couldn't do
And
heroes
so we
anymore.
couldn't really, I
yeah.
couldn't really do heroes so much, so we were looking for young men. Yeah, the technology for us was the early days. It was still old cinema, really.
Yeah.
It was still the old way cinema was done. Great big projectors.
I was just curious about the technique. So there must have been other dubbing companies,
Yeah.
right? And
The-
so did they do it the way that you did it?
Yeah. Though it was all done the same way. Towards the end of our time dubbing movies,
Around the 80s.
during the 80s, from about the early 80s onwards, video started coming in. And so, and that was quicker, and also they required a greater precision, because however well we thought we dubbed the movie and we caught all the lip flaps, because there's nothing worse when you see a dubbed film and there's a sort of movement of the mouth and nothing's coming out. However well we did it, because they get the blokes in the back, they weren't being paid anything either, the technicians. And so they could get a bit lazy, or someone would call out and then he'd press the button, say half a second later. So the whole reel would be out. It would go, you know, everyone would start talking with an open mouth.
That's what they made fun of in Kung Pao.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't
Legend of
seen
the
it.
Fist? It's like that whole movie is just like making fun of bad dubbing. But so, okay, so was there ever, so was it all one take kind of stuff, or like did you have...
Definitely, I was the one take king.
Well,
I was
usually-
the one take king. We worked at a very, very intense pace in order to be able to finish a film like that. A very good friend of ours, he had the franchise for Golden Harvest,
Which
Star
was-
War picture,
Bruce Lee.
which was Bruce Lee. Yeah, Barry Haig was a good friend of ours. Now Barry, he would agonise. Oh, we missed a flap. We should have come in earlier on that. And we would all be sitting there, us dubbers, you know, we'd be sitting there twiddling our thumbs, because hell, we get it right, and then the technician at the back gets it wrong. So don't worry yourself.
Okay.
And the producer doesn't worry too much about it,
Oh, that's
because
interesting.
he's selling it for 5,000 US to the whole of Central America. He's got a 10,000 for Brazil or something, you know. So he doesn't really worry too much. So we were doing a kind of a job, and that's what it was, what they wanted. And if we were really mucking it up, then the technicians at the back would tell us.
Okay.
Sometimes they did, but invariably so. What would happen is I would go, when we rehearsed a bit, commented, maybe had to take a few words, change a few words around, and we were, the actual crew for that loop was sitting on a bench in front of the mic with a script in front of them, the empty cinema screen up there, the projector and the technicians at the back, and I would go, "Look, Yam," which means record,
Yeah.
and it would start.
Okay.
And then we would be speaking, watching the lip movements and getting it all right. We looked at it once. Look at it once, dub it.
Okay.
Look at it once, dub it. And it was my job
Yeah.
also to see when they missed, or when they needed to speed up, or take a word out, or put a couple of words in. So I would do that at the time,
Yeah.
and then, okay, look, yeah, record. And I would be watching it as we recorded, and even if I'm speaking and participating as well, be watching it, and if I thought it was all right, which I invariably did, the circle would go up so the technicians at the back could see it,
Oh, okay.
and I would say, "Sai Tai Hadun," which means no need to look, on to the next one.
We
Okay.
didn't even look at the finished product.
So that's how we did it. We looked at it once, record, next one. And
you provide the food and no breaks.
we provided the food,
With
no
no
breaks. You weren't allowed to fart, you know.
So the funny thing is that sometimes you get a dubber, he might be new and we're not sure how good he is, and he wants to be an actor, so he tries to perfect it, so he misses all the time. So we can be waiting and it'd be 4, 5, 6 takes and he loses his...
Yeah, there were three main companies in Hong Kong. Elizabeth and I started off the dubbing. I was invited to turn up one Sunday. We both worked for
Radio Hong Kong.
Radio Television Hong Kong. We're both broadcasters, my wife in the classical music department. And so that's how I got introduced to the business. And later, we had a kind of monopoly of all the independents and the foreigners. We did Cambodian movies, we did Korean movies, we did Japanese movies.
Oh, so you started off as a voice actor,
Yeah.
and then you decided to do it yourself.
I started off as a voice actor,
Yeah.
and then the bloke that I was working for, he left Hong Kong. And maybe he didn't realise how significant the business was. He just passed it on to me.
Yeah.
And I, at that stage, required to work with someone else.
And his wife-
who they'd
yeah.
known. But very soon they too left, and they left, so I had sole charge of it. There was another group, I mentioned my mate Barry Haig. He had the franchise for Golden Harvest, Garwal Ping Chern, which was Bruce Lee. Not just Bruce Lee, but
Yeah.
did all Bruce Lee movies. And my mate Barry, when we were dubbing Bruce Lee movies, he wanted it to be perfect.
So that would be you voice acting for his company.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And he would be.
And then
working
the
for us.
other company worked for Shaw Brothers.
Yeah.
Shaw Brothers was the kind of Warner Brothers of
Yeah.
Chinese movies
In Hong Kong.
in Hong Kong and also in Singapore. Actually, originally they were from Singapore, and then I think they set up in Hong Kong after the Second World War.
So did you have a studio?
We would use studios. When we started off, the main studio we used was part of an old film set and was really, really, really run down. I mean, it looked a bit like, one of those towns in the Ukraine after the Russians had captured it. And they didn't have any mass transit system in Hong Kong in those days. So my wife and I would get a taxi up to an area known as Diamond Hill, Chun Sek San, which was actually a squatter area. So there were no roads or anything there.
Oh,
there were
wow.
just kind of broken down
It's a market,
paths,
really.
and there was sort of electric cables sort of running everywhere and short-circuiting, and there'd be fires
no.
and God knows what. And the dogs, there were all these wild feral dogs with scabies and everything. And we'd be lugging all the cans of Coca-Cola and sliced ham sandwiches in big plastic bags up the hill to when we came to the studio. That studio was called Kin Shing Studio, and it was actually a little old cinema which was used for, presumably, what do they call it in movies when they do the daily shoots and looking at that, reviewing
dailies.
the dailies.
Yeah.
And so we took it over as a kind of it was used for us as a dubbing studio, and it had a couple of old sofas with all the stuffing hanging out where we used to sit, and there was an extremely smelly toilet out the back.
Oh no.
So our living conditions were actually, our working conditions were extremely primitive.
But it was not the only studio. There were a few other
No,
studios.
there were. Then later, there was one in particular in Chim Sa Tsui that we used a lot, United Film.
But these are
Company.
studios not our choice. We were given that
Yeah,
those studios
we
by
would
the,
we would
by
be
the
sent by the
distributors,
producer,
yeah.
the distributor.
You also did some animation as well, and Godzilla.
Yeah.
Because nowadays, the voice of Goku for Dragon Ball is very famous. And some people who do animation, their voices are very famous. Did you get recognized for Godzilla or anything like that?
No. Nor did we even consider recognition. We just did it. It was a job.
Yeah.
was early
The
days,
animated movies, so we did do one or two, were for the big Japanese film company Toho. And Toho, I think, was the Japanese equivalent of Shaw Brothers. They churned out the kind of routine, common or garden, cheap, regular movies.
Yeah,
They didn't.
and those monster
they weren't.
movies.
They were not Kurosawa.
No.
But they did Godzilla.
Yeah.
They did all the Godzillas, yeah.
And you
You
did
did
like
Transformers.
multiple voices for that.
No, not Transformers. I did multiple voices for some of the Japanese, because the Japanese, when they talk, they go on and on and on.
Yeah, the scripts.
So,
Oh, really?
I mean,
Yeah.
and also we did the Japanese version. It is a Japanese title, Tora 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 for Pearl Harbor. And I can remember whether it was Admiral Yamamoto talking,
Yeah.
but he talked for about 40, 50 lines. And all I had was, the Navy is ready. You know, and I had to kind of somehow
God.
turn that out into a speech. It had to sound reasonably convincing.
And so like that was all
Yeah, that's
like
given.
up to you. Like they
Yeah.
gave you like
Yeah.
full reins to write.
Yeah,
and-
to be fair, I think the word got around because they were always looking. We had a kind of standard rate. By and large, the rate that we got paid didn't change in a 10-year period, did it really, darling? I mean, it was
That's
a
why we like Kung Fu
it was
films.
$1 a foot.
Kung Fu.
Because
A
there's so
dollar a
many
foot, that's a
fight
Hong Kong
scenes, yeah.
dollar.
Yeah.
So a 9,000 foot film, we would get $9,000. Out of that, I had to pay everybody, and the food, and the
Yeah.
Coca-Colas, and the taxi fares,
This is 50 years ago.
and so it stayed, and we would have done. We were very prolific, as I said to you.
Yeah.
Our record was 8 films in 9 days,
That's insane.
which is actually just before we got married. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
And because they heard that we were going to be gone for 2 or 3 months, they went,
They were freaking out.
because we got a reputation among all the independents that we were very reliable. And so they came looking for us. So my wife, the phone didn't stop, did it? You know,
Yeah.
I've got another one, I've got another. I said, oh. But we just,
Yeah.
if we got business, we got business. We just did it.
Could I just tell you how we did it? I'd get a call from the producer or distributor, and then we see the film the next day or whatever, and then we make a deal and say, when do you want it? And it's always like yesterday. You know?
Yeah.
And then I have to call Matthew and say, do we have time? So we call it all the dubbers, and they say, yeah, they're all available. And most of them are
It's like
broadcasters.
the news team. Dubbing team. assemble.
Yeah, we all work in the same company anyway, so
Yeah.
they're all available, and this is all extra money for.
Oh, they were all from RTHK.
No,
Mainly-
not at all.
Not
no.
mainly.
Yeah, because Barry was Radio
And-
Hong Kong. There was one other fellow, Graham was
Yeah, and
was
there's
Radio
George.
Hong Kong. George,
Yeah.
George. But actually finding good dubbers was quite difficult
Yeah.
because it took a particular kind of skill. The ones I really didn't want were thespians, you know, the creatures of the stage.
Yeah.
They would hesitate. The key ingredient was fast reactions. They had to have extremely alert fast reactions. They had to hit the lip flap. So that was a physical requirement, nothing to do with any acting ability. The second requirement was that they had an interesting voice. By that I mean they could use inflection. I mean, some people,
Yeah.
you know, when you record them, their voice sounds like that all the time. There's no inflection to it
Yeah.
at all.
Actually,
Monotone.
that's something you can't help it. That's not bad. You just change your voice.
So then.
So I would had to have an advertisement in the newspapers, and maybe we get along 20 people for the audition, and we would test them. Maybe we get one.
Oh wow.
It was actually quite difficult. So when you got a crew, because it was quite good money for them in those days, we're talking about nearly 50 years ago, and they would get 500 Hong Kong dollars, which was the equivalent then of about 50 quid or something, let's call it.
For one night,
Yeah, say in New Zealand it would be at least $100, $200 or something in New Zealand. And that's just for one night's work after your day work's finished. So if you were doing that 3 or 4 times a week, you're suddenly starting, you know, you can go and buy yourself a Harley Davidson, can't you?
Yeah.
So was it? So they all got paid the same, no matter the
No,
No,
they
the
got
lead-
paid
the-
according
the-
to time,
Oh, yeah.
not ability, time. If they were there
For
the
2
whole
years.
time, they got 500. If they were only there for a couple of hours, I'd give them a couple of hundred.
And you'd organise it like that? So if
Yes,
I had
yes.
you-
I would redo the bit parts. I would take their loops out.
Yeah.
So let's say it would be reel 2, loops 4 and 5, and then reel 4, loops 6 and 7. And I would tell the technicians, and they'd show them to me in that order. And so we did do that. That was another job for my wife and I in preparing it. Actually, we got it down to a fine art, didn't we?
Yeah. So to save money, what we did was we did all the extras first, because then they come for 2 hours and they go.
Okay.
And the ones who are doing the major characters, we keep them the whole night because he's going to be paid anyway, so he'll be there from the beginning to the end.
And then, so you had like a core crew, and then
Yeah.
Yes.
extras would come in and
A
out
core
depending on
crew.
the job.
A core crew.
And then we have a crowd crew. I mean, the crowd crew is everybody.
Yeah.
And because in those days it was the tapes were you can what do you call it, put on top of each other.
Yeah.
So you have first crowd, second crowd, and then you mix
Yeah.
it.
So, I mean, standard crowd scenes were casinos.
Market.
I mean, Chinese culture. Every small town, like in New Zealand, there used to be a couple of taverns. In China, every small town had a casino. And usually with the casino was a brothel. So that was your that's where the girls figured. And then there are also restaurants. I mean, the dining scenes.
Yeah.
Sometimes market scenes, but those would be the crowds. Yeah.
And then why did it stop, or did they start wanting American voices?
No, what happened was the technology changed. So then there was greater professional requirement for greater professional ability, I think. And I think the bottom fell out of the worldwide kung fu film market. Everyone was becoming more sophisticated, or they had more money.
Can we talk about? Do you remember doing the dub for Police Story?
Police Story, is that the Police Story that
Jackie Chan one?
Jackie Chan. I don't think we did that. I think that's after our time. Because we kind of wound up, our heyday was from the early to mid 70s through to the early 80s. We did it for a 10-year period. We were very, very busy.
Yeah.
I'd say we must have dubbed 400 to 500 or maybe more feature-length movies.
Yeah.
We were very, very busy.
Because see, that's so interesting, because you're credited as Inspector Wong on IMDb. I'm not sure if that's wrong or not, but that's interesting, because that film had 4 versions of the dubbing for different markets, like theatrical, and then the VHS one, and then would that happen often with were there different versions for different markets?
But that must have been a reflection of the changing nature of the Far Eastern film industry, I would have thought. They were starting to impose on themselves, and perhaps it was demanded, with higher standards. I mean, we worked at a very, very, very basic level.
Yeah.
And that is what the Far Eastern film market was, from the 30s through the 40s to the 50s, 60s, into the 70s, and then it started to change.
Yeah.
And the technology changed, and so they probably need to redub it again.
We
For the
did
video.
And we had
we
retired
did
then.
dub a few video, like these were TV series.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
We did dub a few TV series, which weren't bad. I mean, but they would have 26 half-hour episodes or something.
What was the difference between working with the Chinese producers and the Japanese producers and the ones from other markets?
Well,
Was there any difference?
By and large, the difference was the film itself, not the not the producer distributor who approached Elizabeth.
Mm.
They were nearly always Chinese middlemen.
Oh,
Bear
okay.
in mind the great strength of the Cantonese, the southern Chinese, is that they are all round the world. I mean, there isn't a city anywhere in the world where there aren't a few Cantonese businessmen or merchants. And so that was the international global network.
Okay.
So the Toho films were handled, their international distribution was handled by Chinese.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Well, and I think Hong Kong film market is it's still massive, and so
Yeah.
all the Asian films would come to Hong Kong first,
Yeah.
and then they make
Yes.
their deals for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Hong Kong was a central place for all that stuff.
Yeah.
On the topic of Toho, you mentioned you did some animated films for them.
Yeah.
Was the process any different when dubbing animated films compared to live action?
No.
So you have to lip flap.
Yeah, you have to lip flap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was
We
it
don't
any-
do like Robin Williams. He just sort of runs off at the mouth on a mic, and then they fit it to him. They do it in reverse, don't they?
Was it any easier? Did it have to be less accurate when it's not
Probably,
real
probably.
people?
Maybe.
Yeah, but
a
you have
little
to be
bit.
more animated.
Yeah.
Your voice.
I mean, it's
Otherwise-
like now if you are on Netflix, and if you watch, there's a German series on. Let's maybe have a look, or a Swedish or Spanish. I prefer it when there are subtitles. My wife gets bored having to read the subtitle, so we look at the dubbed versions. But after we watched the dubbed version for about 10 minutes, say this is no good because the voices aren't
Yeah.
Doesn't suit
good
you.
enough. I mean, it could be a really good actor on the screen, but the voice comes across as a bit lackluster.
But see, like,
That's what they said with Squid Games.
Oh,
A lot of
really?
the Korean people were saying that the dubbing
Yeah.
didn't match the quality of
Yeah.
the Korean writing.
yeah.
Or sometimes the voice doesn't
Yeah.
suit the
Yeah,
character.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, he's a big
Yeah.
guy and he's got a small voice.
Yeah.
But see, like when I watched the kung fu films as a kid, it was all just dubs, So to me, like that's the voice of Bruce Lee, that's the voice of Jackie Chan,
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then I did see the Chinese versions eventually, and like I was like, that's not that
That's
that
not
doesn't
what you
make sense to
remember.
me,
We used to set it up a bit, I have to say. I used to like pretending I was Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper and Gregory Peck were my two.
Oh yeah.
Then I had Barry Haig, who did Bruce Lee. He'd sort of fancy himself as Randolph Scott or something like that. So it was vaguely, we did this kind of transatlantic American accent.
That's what the distributor wanted.
Yes, that's what
Producers.
they
Yeah, they
wanted it.
American.
They wanted
Because the
it to
market
sound
was
American.
more,
Well, it sounded they were meant to be the real professionals.
Yeah.
Well, they still are. It's Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to involve into discussions we've had before. So you've done a lot of kung fu films, and is it safe to say you got kind of bored of kung fu films because of the formula?
I think so.
It would be safe to say that I was never, ever at all interested in kung fu. And I thought they were unbelievable rubbish.
So then what's the difference between that and, let's say, sort of the Western formula, which you like, or samurai?
I don't
or
like
samurai
all
formula?
Western form. I mean, the so-called hop-along Cassidy cowboy movie.
Spaghetti westerns.
The spaghetti westerns. I wasn't a fan of the spaghetti. I thought Sergio Leone actually got it wrong. He liked these long, drawn-out sequences. I don't think he made.
Yeah.
The one who made good Western movies was the bloke called Sam Peckinpah, and he made really good Western movies. And then along came Clint Eastwood later, and his were real B movies, but were well made. They were well made B movies. Is that possible?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean
Yeah,
well
absolutely.
made? Is in the story or the quality of film?
And the economy of it, I mean, don't over egg it. Don't have long shots just for the sake of it,
Yeah, but that's kind of what Sergio Leone was known for, right? Like it had like in like all his movies.
Oh, like the good, bad, and the ugly. And it
atmosphere.
just goes on and on.
on and on without
But-
terrible music.
But like it's kind of interesting, right? Like the era of the spaghetti westerns, because they were also all dubbed and made kind of cheaply,
Yeah,
and
Cinecittà.
yeah, and it's like, and the kung fu films and those kind of Eastern films, they were all like double, triple features at your local grindhouse. You
Yeah,
know? So
yeah.
like it makes sense that they just churned them out like a factory
Yep.
at that time.
But then, did you, because you're dubbing them all, did you notice the quality of kung fu films go up, or do you think they got worse? Because they did it
No,
so much.
we knew when we were doing a film where they'd spent a bit more time and money on it, and please don't think I despise kung fu films at all. I mean, I just don't really
Yeah.
It's not your thing.
enjoy them. But what we did enjoy, I think it's fair to say, is it's amazing because it was a popular form of entertainment. It was very unself-conscious. It just did what it did for as cheap as possible. So it was actually very revealing of culture, of local culture, Chinese culture, Korean culture, Japanese culture. You could really see the distinct difference. Korean culture is quite different from Chinese culture and Japanese culture. If you're from another part of the world, you look at Far Easterners and you think they all look the same. And it took me a while, but Chinese, they look at Europeans and they all look the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what was kind of it was interesting and informative that one could see the local culture coming through, and actually, the kindness, the simple things, the simple human virtues would shine through, and the things they valued. Now, Chinese culture, one very interesting aspect of Chinese culture, they love the gambler. They love the gambler. The gambler is a hero figure in China. I'm not talking about Chinese literature or anything.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the ordinary Chinese. The gambler, because he puts his life on the line.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of the kung fu movies we did, the hero would actually gamble his arm. Well, if he lost, he'd chop the arm off. I mean, because he'd run out of money.
Yeah.
It's formidable, but they loved gambling. That's why there's a casino. In every little town, there was a casino. The Chinese would be gambling. And because, my wife was born in Hong Kong, but I lived most of my life in Hong Kong, Chinese love to gamble. They just love it. It's one of their great kind of cultural, besides all their food and everything, one of their great cultural, I wouldn't call it an asset, it's just an aspect of them,
Yeah.
So coming back to the title of this episode, talking about making making something formulaic economically, you're a fan of Mel Brooks.
Yes,
And
intense
would
fan.
you say he does the same thing
Absolutely.
economically?
Well, now the first rule of Mel Brooks is do it as cheaply as possible and make as much money as possible. So they're not mutually exclusive, although kind of they are. He's also got a little bit of flair and genius about him, because his first movie, The Producers, remains, I think, one of the great films ever made, and one of the funniest. And when I first saw it, I couldn't believe it. It was so funny. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Inspired. But it was a flop. Made hardly any money. Later it did, because the word got out
Yeah.
that this was a real, and the people were talking about it. It became a cult movie. And then Mel found out you could turn them into musicals, and you could make even more money.
Can you imagine Luca doing that one day? Just completely selling out.
So he started saying, "Oh, which ones can I turn into musicals?" So he virtually turned a lot into musicals, didn't he? I mean, given half a chance.
Because like that was the like that was also like the era like of the time, right? Musicals were popular, or am I getting it wrong?
No. Yeah.
It was just like a formula.
No. When Mel Brooks only turned them into musicals in the last 20 years or so.
End of his
okay.
career,
Yeah. No. And the producers, he remade, didn't he? Did it turn into a musical? Yes, it was a musical. Yeah.
And
Well,
they
it was
remade it.
originally a musical, but it was a send-up of musicals.
Yeah.
It was Hitler doing the high kick. You know.
Yeah. And then I remember reading as well that Mel Brooks doesn't really like to conform, and so Blazing Saddles was pretty unique in its time because it had a black sheriff, right? And that's part of the joke is having a black sheriff.
It's the entire joke.
It's the entire
The entire joke is it's poking fun at racism.
yeah.
And
And the Western.
yeah.
Oh wait, there's
American
that
racism.
scene where they're hiring bad guys.
And the SS turn up.
Yeah, the SS
Yeah.
and there's KKK
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
all these different bad guys.
Yeah. It's a leitmotif throughout Mel Brooks' movies is racism and anti-Semitism. It runs right the way. I mean, that lovely film of his, To Be or Not to Be, world famous in Poland, and about rescuing the Jews from the concentration camps.
Can we just go back a little to the dubbing?
Sure.
Because when we were doing the films, we were never given credit, who's the dubber and all that. But what was very strange was that, like a few years ago, my nephew calls up and says, "Oh,
Yeah.
I saw Uncle Matthew. I heard Uncle Matthew on the Wu-Tang Clan music." And I said, "Who's Wu-Tang Clan?" I don't even know that. And I told Matthew, "Who's that?" And we're very old-fashioned. We like classical music, the
Yeah.
blues,
That's a
jazz,
hashtag.
and all that.
Who's Wu-Tang Clan?
And then my nephew played it because when he was a little boy, he used to come to our studio
Yeah.
and listen, and so he recognized the voice. And we've realized that the Wu-Tang Clan uses Matthew's voice in some of the opening music, so I was surprised.
What movie was that from?
I had no idea.
Absolutely.
No idea.
I mean, my wife was quizzing me the other night on whether I could remember any of the films, the titles of any of the films
Oh wow.
that we dubbed, and the answer is no.
Yeah, because there's some like samples that the Wu-Tang Clan uses where it's like very obvious. Oh, that's from the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. That's from the Mystery of Chess Boxing, and all that. But yeah.
Yeah,
There's
well,
some
the
rare
Shaolin
ones.
often cropped up. I mean, it was
Yeah.
called
Yeah, the Shaolin.
the Monk of Shaolin, or
Mm.
the Man from Shaolin, or the Flying Fists of Shaolin.
Yeah, there's so many
Yeah,
of those.
yeah.
So many of those.
So he was
But
famous.
yeah.
His voice is famous, but
Yeah.
nobody knows it's Matthew.
But what was the thing about you guys not being credited? Is that just like an oversight, or
No.
what?
No. We didn't seek it, nor was it mentioned, nor was it offered. I mean,
Oh, wow.
it
It
was just a
wasn't.
job.
It
Yeah.
wasn't. It was just a job. We
Yeah.
were literally helping the producer distributor.
Yeah.
Just
It was the final thing that he did, and then
yeah.
it
He would give
went
us like
out.
maybe 5 movies. He said, "We want this done
Yeah.
within this month." Or in
And then
2
he'd,
weeks."
he'd send them off, and he'd get his money. As I said, he'd get sort of 10,000 for Brazil and 5,000
Yeah.
for Nicaragua and Costa Rica or something,
Yeah, that's yeah. That sucks because like we just won't know like how many and what voices.
And
you
I
guys
think in
did.
those days, dubbers were
well.
not really given any
Maybe
credit.
that's the way it should be done.
Oh,
We
right,
were
right.
discussing the other day about Shakespeare's London. Far be it from me to make any comparisons with Shakespeare's London. But from what little we know, there were theatres all over the place.
Yeah.
There were playwrights all over the shop. And most of them were unsung. I mean, like
Yeah.
The real hacks, nobody knew who they were.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who the actors were. Of course, the leading actors, the Lord Justice's players or whoever, they knew who they were, but not a lot of them.
Yeah.
They would be almost anonymous. So we never know. We did a job, and we were happy. It was it wasn't exactly under the table income, but it was kind of undeclared income.
Ah, okay.
Except that I always did declare it. I declared it.
Okay.
And I had a company in Taiwan that I used to send the invoices to. And so if anybody had investigated me for tax purposes, they would have found it all there. All my expenses, everything. And I paid tax. Because in Hong Kong it's only 15%. So it was worth my while, 15%, to be entirely legitimate. Just in case
Yeah.
someone dobbed me in.
Yeah.
And the people who dob you in are your competitors. And your competitors can be very dangerous.
Vicious.
They can be quite vicious. But I'll say this, I had no fear from the Chinese. As I said, we did about 500 movies. They would discuss with Elizabeth, and we would agree on the price. Often it wasn't even a shake of the hand, it was just...
Okay.
No contract.
And then,
Oh wow, no contract.
no contract,
Oh,
nothing
wow.
written. We would finish it,
Shit.
and there was the money. In an envelope, there was the cash. Bang, like that. And out of those, say 500 movies, only once were we let down. And for me, I mean, I had many instances of this being confirmed, but in many respects, the Chinese are the best people in the world to do business with. And they seek to trust you. Unfortunately, unscrupulous people get hold of them, and then they find they can't trust you. But on the whole, the Chinese seek to trust, and once they've established a relationship of trust, that's a very genuine trust, then it will flourish. And so it's slightly changed with mainland China because of the heritage of Marxist Leninism and God knows what else that's been going on there. But on the whole, given their culturally, and that's why they're such good businessmen, because it moves, things move fast.
Yeah.
If they find they can trust you, then right,
Here's 10 more.
No, but things really kind of move.
Yeah. It sucks that you did over 500 and you're only credited for 11 on IMDb.
Well, I mean, IMDb wasn't around back then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, we were very big.
Okay.
We did the most business. We were the busiest and the biggest.
So you would have kept going if there were more contracts?
If there were more movies, but
But it's a new technology.
new
It doesn't-
technology, and then they wanted to do it during the daytime.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's what happened. And then what they did was there was the television companies, TVB, and TVB in Hong Kong and ATV.
They started.
And they started their own dubbing companies because they had all the video equipment.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they started employing
It's a full-time
English
job.
speakers as a full-time job, and you were no longer paid for doing a movie. You were just had a weekly salary. Yeah.
So they sit there all day.
Yeah, they sit there all
Well,
day.
we cut the films into
Yeah.
loops, and these are no longer loops. These are all the new technology.
Yeah.
So
Tapes.
they will sit there from the beginning of the film till the end, waiting for their part to come.
Yeah.
So you could be in the beginning of the film and the last in the film, and you have to sit there.
So when did you guys stop?
when we got
Petered
married,
out. We got married.
in 82.
And children started arriving, and my other businesses started to thrive. But it kind of naturally happened. I think by the mid-'80s, we were out of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
we
he was
did,
getting old, his voice is
and we
changing.
didn't really miss it. Anyway, by that time, my other businesses
Yeah.
were doing much better, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the film dubbing business, while it lasted, that's what gave me my start.
He was 26 when he
I
started.
used that money seeded I was in publishing, and then I was in another business, which ended up as a driving school, and I used it as seed money.
Yeah.
And I bought my first flat, put down the deposit, because it got me this money. I was living high off the hog. I mean, I said $1 a foot,
Yeah.
but at least 50% of that would end up mine,
Right. Right.
because I was the director, chief actor, chief writer, and
And I did all the other work.
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get paid.
Actually, when we got
She must have
married,
been very young then when you
Yeah,
did it.
I was 19,
yes,
20.
she was known as the Let Me Go girl.
Don't explain why.
Oh, I get it because of the
We chased around
characters that you dubbed and
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
well,
like what you like
because I
because
can't,
they had very limited
Yeah, I
female
know.
characters.
And
Yes.
also, I can't
There
really
wasn't-
play the
wasn't
lead
a
role.
range,
I
yeah.
can't really play the lead role because they usually want American accent, and I was
Yeah.
quite young, so I used to do all the side bits. Like I'm the girl who got raped. I'm the girl
Yeah.
who's doing the fight scenes. No dialogues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that would be like three people
Yeah.
just doing the fight
No, but you
scene.
did do.
So you played the damsel.
No, but my wife, she got better at it. She did do dubbing. She had good reactions. I tell you, the fundamental requirement is hitting that flap, hitting that lip flap.
Yeah.
We used to call them flaps.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, like, it's so cool just to, like, know about the process and the history of it, because, yeah, you guys were a part of like, a significant part of, like, underground film history.
Yeah,
And Hong Kong cinema at its peak.
Yeah.
yeah, part of an era.
Yeah.
Definitely part.
Because
of
you
an
were
era.
around when Shaw Brothers Studio was
Yeah.
thriving.
It was
Yep.
like a high
You know,
Yep.
now it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we knew all the stars. I mean, I did quite a few of the big stars, not Bruce Lee or anything, but
Usually died.
the other guys, and we'd have a bit of fun. I mean, otherwise it would get boring. So
Yeah.
we would deliberately ham it up.
So you'd meet the Chinese stars, they'd say good job. I saw the version.
never. No.
You just kind of did it, sent it off, next time.
And that's exactly their attitude too.
Yeah.
They just turn up at Shaw Brothers or wherever it was. They just go through their moves and then off.
Because that was because like it's so like interesting because Shaw Brothers had that massive compound,
Massive.
Yeah.
and then like someone like Gordon Liu, right, who's in the 36th Chamber of Shaolin and played Pai Mei in Kill Bill, like he would like star in like 50 movies just back to back to back to back to back. In some of the films, he'll be fighting the character that he played in the previous movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the same faces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We recognize that too when we
Yeah.
dubbing. Oh,
Yeah, it was a very, very like interesting era, man. I love
Yeah.
those movies.
Yeah, sometimes the most interesting, I'm not saying the greatest works of art, but sometimes the most interesting works of art come out of just such a routine, mundane environment because everybody's working at it.
Yeah.
And they've each got their own set of skills and they supply those skills, but sometimes it really comes together, knits and works.
That's what it's like. That's the same with the old like studio system as well, right? Michael Curtis directed over 400 movies. One of them just happens to be Casablanca, like one of the, one of the classics. But he he was like one of those like factory workers. So
Yeah.
they don't do
There
that.
was
like
a very
that
good
anymore.
movie about Michael Curtis the other day, which I saw.
It's a documentary.
No,
Or,
it's a movie.
Oh wow.
I forget who played Michael Curtis. You must look it up. It's only recently been
Oh
made.
okay. Yeah.
And it's very, very
Interesting.
good movie. Like that other good movie that didn't get any awards called Mank, about Mankiewicz. doing
Oh,
Citizen Kane and all that kind of thing.
Oh, really?
Was that was
Fincher.
Gary Oldman or something?
Yeah, Gary Oldman. Yeah,
Ah,
Blade
okay.
Man. That was and this Michael Curtis movie was made about the same time.
Oh, wow.
I found
have to
it
check it out.
absolutely fascinating, and it also features the whole story about how Casablanca got made.
Wow, that'd be
Because
interesting.
they wanted to stop him making Casablanca because he was mucking around with the story though. They didn't like the story. I mean, at the end, he has the Nazi sympathising Vichy guy played by Claude Rains going off with Humphrey Bogart like they're kind of
Pals.
best buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was. And the Nazis in the movie, they weren't made out to be too bad, you know. I mean, they were.
Yeah, but like that would be interesting to watch because you don't know much about that era. Like, there's not as much behind
Because
the
the
scenes
Germans,
information.
Hitler and the Germans and Goebbels had let Hollywood know that they weren't going to distribute any Hollywood movies in Germany if they were antagonistic towards the Nazis.
Wow.
So the producer of Casablanca was trying to tone it down the whole time, and Curtis was slipping in things.
It's so interesting. Yeah. Cool. Anything else, you guys?
No, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Learned a lot. Yeah, hopefully our listeners and viewers out there, you guys learn about this golden era of kung fu exploitation films.
Yeah, good.
And
I talk
Yeah.
too much.
that's good though. Cool.
Okay, awesome. And I think you did a good job. I'm not going to include it, but you didn't mention the Matrix. I was just saying one of the reasons, like,
And Blazing Saddles.
because I remember the first time Matrix came out, and I asked Dad if he wanted to watch it, and he went, "Isn't that another kung fu movie?"
Yeah, it's not. But like it's kind of interesting.
And Kill Bill, isn't that another kung fu movie?
Yeah, same fight guy for Kill Bill and
Matrix.
yeah.
So you can't help it, can you? You can't help it. But I
I
think
mean-
you did a good
I
job.
mean,
We won't include it in the challenge.
All right.
Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe. Comment as well on any films that you want us to watch. And we'll see you next time.
Cool.
See ya.
Bye.
Peace.